Now, the Democratic Alliance in the City of Johannesburg says it was able to negotiate a better deal for residents in the 2020-21 budget. The 68 billion rand budget was tabled yesterday after numerous delays and the threat of administration by the Provincial Cooperative Governance MEC. The budget was finally approved by opposition parties, except for the EFF. Now, the DA in Johannesburg says it was able to shape the budget to include significant rates reductions for commercial and residential properties. And to unpack the story now, we're joined by Leah Knott, the DA's caucus leader in the Johannesburg Council. She joins us via Zoom. Leah, good morning. Thanks so much for your time this morning. Let me first begin by asking you, before we get to the very important issue of those rates reductions, tell me about the constant delays in tabling this budget.
Well, I think we have to look at it in context. You know, COVID kind of caused an upheaval, particularly for Joburg, because our council is so big. So we have 270 councillors that sit at council, and when the lockdown happened, essentially none of our meetings could continue. So all of our committee meetings, Section 79, all of those that needed to be held in order to push the reports through to get to council were all on standby. So until we could get virtual meetings up and running, we were delayed slightly, because you would know that the draft budget should be tabled 90 days before the end of the financial year, and the final budget for approval 30 days before the end of the year. So we were, delayed in terms of that, with the final budget coming only at the end of June. We then, we weren't happy with the capital budget as it stood. And we were given the opportunity to engage with the administration to point out where our issues lay. And we did that quite extensively. We sat over weekends with them and through several meetings and negotiated, what we felt should be seen in the budget for this current financial year.
Yeah, and I suppose the threat of administration by the Provincial Cooperative Governance MEC, would that have brought more urgency to tabling the budget?
Look, we had two options. We could either allow a budget to be tabled that was at full increases in terms of services, rates, etc., and also with relation to capital projects. That may or may not have passed in council, depending on the support at the time. Or we could go in and negotiate, a budget that gave residents quite a substantial amount of relief. And yes, the last thing I think any of us wants is for Joburg to go under administration during the pandemic that we're experiencing. It would be devastating for residents. Your councils would be removed. Basically, your escalation methods that you were currently using would not be there. An administrator would be put in charge of the biggest metro in the country, with residents really not having an avenue of communication with the city.
Yeah. So let's talk about the good news story this morning in the City of Johannesburg. Significant rates reductions, we're told, for commercial and residential properties. I can't wait for you to tell us more.
We're actually now on par with the increases that Cape Town have passed in their council. And I think what's important to remember is that without rates, the city actually doesn't have a revenue base, because it's largely funded through the rates portfolio. And rates are also used to essentially, in part, fund our service entities such as City Power and Joburg Water. So we've gone down from, I think it was initially 5.2, then it was 4.9, and it was approved at 4% increases across the board. And your commercial property tariff was reduced down to a ratio of 1 to 2.5. So that'll see residents, experiencing not as steep of an increase as they would have. And this also needs to be taken into consideration with what we're working on now with the city, is a rates relief document, which will see about 400 million rand being made available to go back into the pockets of residents.
So, Leah, the big issue that we were tracking as we covered the story around the constant delays in the budget being tabled was how it would affect the poor if it didn't happen, if the situation wasn't resolved and, in fact, the council was placed under administration. Now that it has been tabled, what are some of the very important service delivery issues, particularly for poor residents in Johannesburg, that we can now look to track over the coming months?
Well, I think you would have seen that indigent residents were always offered sort of free kilolitres of water if they're registered under the expanded social package. Now you will also see all residents will be given a certain percentage or 6 kilolitres of water free on their monthly bills. It also allows for the electrification of informal settlements. I think we must also remember that taken into context is that a lot of our informal settlements are powered by Eskom. So there are smaller budgets allocated by the city, which are then mixed in with the grants given through by national and obviously what Eskom budgets. That will allow, them to go forward. Places like Zandspruit, the 701 service stands that were actually started or initiated under the DA's term will then be finalized. One of the most important things that we sort of discussed was the protection of infrastructure. If you look at the first quarter of the previous financial year, within just 2.5 months, I think one of our regions had spent almost R1 billion on replacing vandalized and stolen infrastructure. So quite some money has gone into fencing, security lighting, and in order to protect our power. And that'll also enable the city, instead of spending money on fixing infrastructure, they can then spend that money on supplying areas that do not have access to electricity and water. And in terms of we spent a lot of time on the infrastructure, so water pipes, ensuring that our communities are given access to these things and that they are upgraded so that they can keep up with the needs of people. I think some of our areas have seen, particularly Malbarton is going to get upgrades on their substation. We'll see additional electricity being put into Ramsig. On the West Rand, it'll allow us to continue with the Lut substation, which will essentially give the Region C its second Eskom point. That'll allow for the electrification of quite a few informal plots along that particular verge. So I think, we've done particularly well. I mean, I could read out every single item in the budget, but I think, formalization of settlements also, I think there was over 200 million rand partnered with national grants. That's quite important. A lot of our people are still living in very, very, less than, less than, I'm thinking of the word now.
I think horrific is the word you're looking for. Horrific conditions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it's beyond explanation. Until you've gone there, you can't really explain it in words. And these are the things that we need to focus on, is keeping on track with ensuring that all of our people are living in conditions that are not only conducive to their health during this time, but that are humane, and that allow their children to live, happy and secure lifestyles without having to worry about crime and services and all of these things that plague them every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the way those communities are set up, it exacerbates the spread of COVID-19. Leah, we're out of time, but very, very quickly, what does the budget talk about in relation to the pandemic in Gauteng, particularly as we look at a surge in the province?
Well, we would have seen, particularly in Joburg, is that we will be continuing with building clinics in Florida, upgrading clinics in Zandspruit, and across the city, there's quite a few of them. There's also allocations made to, because as you would know, that the province is sort of attempting to provincialize ambulances, which is not really something that we support, because it takes more ambulances off the road, but there is budget to augment those services. And I know we discussed with the city, registering with province and in terms of being able to run services from Johannesburg, being the biggest city with the highest population. It's really important that we have healthcare services on the ground. Yeah. In addition to that, we focused a lot on the public safety budget, equipping our specialized units. Although we didn't get everything that we wanted there, it did enable us to put money towards protective gear, PPE, things like that would enable our public safety and EMS personnel to run at an optimal condition.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much for your time on the channel. That's the DA's caucus leader in Johannesburg, Leah Knott, joining us there as we track the story around the 68 billion rand budget being tabled just yesterday.